I got a letter from my HOA that said, and I quote, "Your artificial grass is too green and violates the natural appearance standards of community." At first, I thought it was a prank. I literally laughed out loud. Who even says something like that with a straight face? Too green? That's like saying my roof is too roofy or my driveway is too paved. But this was real. The letter had the official HOA letterhead, a date, a fine, and a polite but threatening tone that only HOA notices seemed to master. They wanted me to reduce the artificial vibrance of the turf to a more natural seasonal hue, in line with the community's aesthetic policy. In plain English, they wanted me to brown my fake grass. On purpose. That's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with some well-meaning gardening committee. I was about to go to war with the most passive-aggressive government known to man, the Homeowners Association. Let me rewind just a bit, so you understand how we got here. I moved into this neighborhood. Let's call it Willow Bend Estates. About 9 months ago. It was one of those suburban enclaves with winding sidewalks, picket fences, and more American flags than a 4th of July parade. Everyone waved. Kids rode bikes. And the mailboxes were perfectly aligned like military recruits in formation. It was clean, quiet, and as I'd later learn, obsessively managed by an HOA board that took their job just a little too seriously. I bought a modest 3-bedroom house on a cul-de-sac. I liked the layout. The school district was great, and I thought it'd be the kind of place where I could finally relax a bit. No more noisy neighbors, no more landlords, no more apartment elevators that smelled like old French fries. It was the American dream, or so I thought. Now, I'm not exactly the outdoors or lawn care type. I work from home, have 2 young kids, and the idea of spending my weekends pushing a mower in 100-degree heat didn't exactly excite me. So I did what a lot of people in drought-prone areas are doing these days. I went turf. High-end, eco-friendly artificial grass. It looked amazing. Deep green, soft underfoot, and not a single weed to worry about. Plus, it saved water, required 0 fertilizer, and always looked freshly cut. What's not to love? Installation day was a breeze. I hired a licensed contractor who handled all the permits and gave me a detailed invoice. The crew came in, removed the struggling, patchy lawn, leveled the soil, and laid the turf like pros. When they were done, the yard looked like a golf course. My neighbors even complimented me. "Wow, that's turf? Looks real," one of them said. Another jogger paused to ask what brand I used. It was a hit. For a few weeks, everything was great. I finally felt like I had made a smart homeowner move. Then the letter came. It was tucked into my mailbox, printed on creamy off-white paper with the Willow Bend Estate seal at the top, a willow tree encircled by the words, "Preserving Community Standards." The letter thanked me for being a responsible homeowner, and then dropped the bomb. My grass was too green. Specifically, it was inconsistent with the seasonal color expectations set forth in the HOA landscaping guidelines. I had to read it twice. Apparently, there's a clause buried somewhere in a 47-page HOA handbook I'd barely skimmed when we moved in that says all visible landscaping must reflect the natural conditions of the environment. The implication? Grass in fall and winter months should look, well, a little dead. So, because my turf stayed beautifully green year-round, I was in violation, still thinking it had to be a mistake. I called the number at the bottom of the letter. A woman named Marcy answered in a tone that suggested she'd rather be doing anything else. "HOA compliance, this is Marcy." I explained my situation, politely at first. I told her I had artificial turf, installed professionally, and wasn't sure how or why I could be in violation. "Oh, yes," she said, already familiar. "You're on Mapleview Lane, correct?" "Yes, that's me. We had a visual inspection last week and found your turf is a bit too vibrant for this time of year. The community guidelines call for natural seasonal color transitions. Your lawn stands out quite a bit, actually." I was dumbfounded. "You want me to make my artificial lawn look more brown?" "Well," she said, "some homeowners choose to dust their turf with soil or use light organic shading to help it blend in. It's really about maintaining harmony with the environment. Harmony with the environment for plastic grass." I didn't even know what to say. But what struck me wasn't just the absurdity. It was a calm, practiced way she said it. Like this was normal. like she'd said these exact words before to other unfortunate Green Lawn rebels. I asked her if this was a warning or an actual fine. She told me it was a first notice and that I had 14 days to comply, or I'd receive a $100 non-compliance penalty. At that point, I laughed. I really did. You're fining me for not having brown enough fake grass? I said, thinking maybe now she'd realize how crazy it sounded. There was silence on the other end of the line. Well, she said coolly, I'm just enforcing the policy. If you have an issue, you can submit a formal appeal in writing. And with that, she hung up. My wife thought I was making it up. Then she read the letter and went through the same reaction I did. Disbelief, amusement, and then slow-growing rage. They want us to sabotage the lawn we just paid for, she said. That's insane. I agreed. But insane or not, it was happening. The HOA had officially targeted us, and the countdown was on. The next few days were weird. I started noticing people slowing down as they walked past our house. Some would linger and look at the yard a bit too long. Others made casual conversation with a strange tone, like they were testing the waters. One guy walking his dog stopped and said, "They really got you on the grass thing, huh? Rough." Wait, how'd he know? Turns out, the HOA violation letters are sometimes mentioned in the monthly newsletter under a section called Reminders to Maintain Community Harmony. My house had been cited by address, no names, but still, I had been publicly shamed for turf. I decided to go to the next HOA meeting, which happened to be that Thursday at the community clubhouse. I walked in expecting maybe 10 or 12 people sitting around folding tables. Instead, there were at least 40 chairs, a sign-in sheet, a gavel, yes, a real gavel, and a 5-person panel what I can only describe as middle-aged suburban tribunal judges. I waited for the open floor section to raise my issue. When I did, I spoke calmly. "Hi, my name's Mark. I live on Maple View. I received a violation notice regarding my artificial turf, and I'm hoping to clarify a few things." The board chair, a woman named Cynthia with perfectly ironed khakis and a clipboard that looked like it had tabs for everything, adjusted her glasses and smiled. "Yes, Mr. Mark. I believe we reviewed your case at our last executive session. Your turf was found to be in non-compliance due to excessive vibrance inconsistent with the visual landscape of the season." I couldn't help myself. "So it's too green?" Cynthia frowned but didn't blink. "It's not about green. It's about natural tone harmony. In the winter, natural grass fades. So when yours doesn't, it disrupts the visual cohesion of the neighborhood." I was about to argue, but she wasn't finished. "Our guidelines aren't arbitrary," she added. "They're meant to preserve property values and ensure everyone enjoys a consistent aesthetic standard." There was again aesthetic harmony, the buzzword of the petty tyrant. I left the meeting not just annoyed, but honestly baffled. There were real problems in the world. Crime, inflation, rising costs. And here was a room full of people dedicating their energy to turf tone compliance. When I got home, I told my wife everything. We sat in the living room, looking out the window at our glowing green lawn, the same lawn that made us proud just weeks ago, and realized we were now enemy number one in the eyes of the HOA. And yet, I couldn't just roll over. I'd paid good money for that turf. It wasn't offensive. It wasn't dangerous. It was clean, sustainable, and honestly beautiful. The more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it became. They were trying to enforce nature's seasons on synthetic material. It was peak performative suburban madness. Then I received the second letter. This one wasn't as polite. It had bold print. It said final notice and stated that if I did not correct the issue within 7 days, I'd be fined $100, with additional fines compounding weekly. I'd be labeled a repeat offender, and they might pursue additional remedies. That's when I realized this wasn't about grass. This was about control, and I was about to push back. Hard. After getting that second letter, the one with bold red letters and the veiled threat about additional remedies, I stopped laughing. It wasn't funny anymore. What started as an absurd complaint had turned into a real problem. And the worst part was, I couldn't even talk about it without sounding ridiculous. I tried to explain to people, "Yeah, I'm getting fined by my HOA because my grass is too green. They'd laugh just like I did, but then I'd pull out the letter. That's when the laughing stopped. They'd read it, eyebrows furrowing like they were waiting for a punchline that never came. Some would say, "You've got to be kidding me," but I wasn't. So I decided I had two options. Option one, I could cave, go out there, dump some soil on my lawn, and dim the vibrancy to whatever shade of depression the HOA found acceptable. Or option two, I could fight. I picked option two. The first thing I did was pull out the thick binder labeled Willow Bend Estates HOA Handbook. I had shoved it in a drawer when we first moved in, like any normal person. But now I sat down with it at the kitchen table, highlighter in hand, and started reading like I was studying for bar exam. The thing was a beast. Over 40 pages of guidelines, procedures, fines, landscaping diagrams, and even a color chart for acceptable holiday decorations by month. It read like it was written by a committee of bored English majors with a passion for authoritarian landscaping. But I was determined. I combed through it line by line, looking for the exact clause they were citing against me. It was buried on page 17 under Section 8, Lawn and Ground Cover Aesthetics, subsection 8.3b, which read, "All landscaping visible from the street must reflect a natural appearance in keeping with seasonal environmental norms. Artificial turf must avoid excessively vibrant coloration and remain in harmony with adjacent properties and surrounding flora." It was vague, subjective, and honestly ridiculous. There were no standards for vibrance, no chart, no color code, no objective measurements. Just excessively vibrant, whatever that meant to the HOA board members and their highly tuned aesthetic sensibilities. That was my opening. The next morning, I called a property attorney. Not for a lawsuit, I wasn't made of money, but just for a consultation. I explained the situation, bracing myself for a condescending chuckle. But he surprised me. "Oh, yeah," he said. "I've seen this before. HOAs can get out of hand." He told me that vague rules like this often don't hold up if challenged properly, especially if the HOA was applying them inconsistently or had no defined metric to enforce them. He recommended I start by submitting a formal appeal to the board. If that failed, we could move toward arbitration. So I wrote the appeal, 3 pages, cited the handbook, emphasized the environmental benefits of turf, questioned the enforceability of subjective terms, and requested documentation showing how the HOA defined excessive vibrance. I sent it certified mail. While I waited for a response, I started documenting everything. Every letter, every email, every phone call. I even took pictures of my lawn at different times of the day, with timestamps. And just for fun, I walked around the neighborhood snapping photos of other yards, natural grass, brown patches, overgrown weeds, rusted sprinkler heads. I wasn't the only one violating harmony, but I didn't stop there. I had an idea, a long shot, but something that might work in my favor. I made a video, just me, standing in front of my vibrant, villainous lawn. I explained the whole situation, read parts of the violation letter, held up the handbook, and ended with a dramatic line. "If you think this grass is a threat to neighborhood values, maybe the real problem isn't the turf. Maybe it's the turf police." I uploaded it to YouTube, not expecting much. Just wanted a place to document the insanity. But within 48 hours, it started getting traction. Comments rolled in from people across the country. "HOA strikes again. Absolute madness. Bro, you're not alone. Mine fined me for my mailbox being the wrong shade of beige. Fight the power, green grass hero." It wasn't viral, but it was enough to get attention. A few days later, I got a response from the HOA board. The appeal was under review. In the meantime, the fines would continue to accrue until a decision was reached. Great. I started to feel the pressure. The fines were now at $200. $200 for grass. It was almost laughable again, except my bank account didn't find it funny. Then came the guy with the clipboard. One afternoon, I saw him walking slowly up and down the street, stopping in front of my house. He wore a polo shirt tucked into khakis, had a clipboard in one hand and a phone in the other. He'd glance at the lawn, jot something down, take a picture, then move to a different angle and repeat. I stepped outside. Can I help you? He didn't flinch. Just performing compliance checks for the HOA. Are you at the board? No, he said. I'm a neighborhood compliance officer. Translation, nosy retired guy with nothing better to do. He told me he was volunteering to help maintain standards in the neighborhood. When I asked how he determined which lawns violated seasonal appearance, he said he used aesthetic judgment informed by community norms. That's not a standard. That's an opinion in khakis. After he left, I started to feel a little paranoid, like I was being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I caught people glancing at my yard, then quickly looking away. I get fake friendly comments like, "Still hanging on to that summer color, huh?" Or, "Looks great, almost too great." I wasn't the only one noticing, either. A neighbor from 2 streets over, an older guy named Jim, knocked on my door one evening and introduced himself. He said he'd seen my video and wanted to talk. "They got me a few years ago," he said. "Try to fine me for having too many decorative rocks in my front garden." I laughed. He didn't. I had 5. The limit was 3. Who even decides that? Anyway, I fought it. Lost. Had to remove them. Since then, I've been documenting everything they do. You're not alone. Jim wasn't the only one. Turns out, there was a growing undercurrent of frustration in the community. People who felt the HOA had gone too far. People who were tired of being micromanaged. I started hosting casual meetups. Not secret resistance meetings or anything, just neighbors venting over coffee. We called ourselves the Turf Rebellion, half joking, half serious. Everyone had a story. One woman got cited for unauthorized garden gnome display. Another for planting tulips, apparently not on the approved flower list. Someone else got fined because their Halloween decorations were too scary for young children. It was pettiness on parade. And now, thanks to my video, we had a focal point. Then, the local news called. They'd seen the video and wanted to do a segment on HOA overreach in modern suburbia. I agreed, as long as they didn't show my house number. The segment aired the next weekend. It showed clips from my video, highlighted the violation letter, and included an interview with me, face blurred, where I explained everything. They even interviewed a landscaping expert who confirmed there's no practical reason to brown synthetic turf. The next morning, my inbox was full. People cheering me on, others sharing their horror stories. A few calling me a clout chaser, whatever, but most were just regular folks tired of being told how to live, one tiny rule at a time. The HOA board wasn't thrilled. I got another letter, not a violation this time, but a reminder that community disputes should be handled privately and that media attention may damage the reputation of the neighborhood. Translation: stop making us look bad. I didn't stop. Instead, I doubled down. I started a blog. I posted every letter I received, every response I wrote. I even began reviewing other HOA's policies across the country, comparing absurd rules. Turf Watch became a regular post. People started submitting their own stories, their own violation letters. I was now the reluctant face of the HOA resistance. But all of this was just noise. Entertaining noise, sure, but I still had to deal with my actual issue, and the fines were now up to $250. That's when I made the decision. I was going to push them into arbitration. I talked to the same attorney, and we prepared the paperwork, filed it with the appropriate county office. The arbitration request cited vague language, inconsistent enforcement, lack of objective standards, and the chilling effect of fines used to suppress harmless individual choices. I didn't know if I'd win, but I knew this. They were going to have to fight harder than just sending a few letters. And while I waited for the hearing date, I had one last idea. They wanted natural. I'd give them natural. Not by giving in, not by browning my lawn, but by showing them the absurdity of their own rules in the most obvious, over-the-top way I could think of. So I made plans. I wasn't just going to comply. I was going to over-comply. And they weren't going to see it coming. The day I decided to go all in on my counterattack, I stood at the edge of my yard and looked at the glorious green turf like it was a battlefield. Not a single blade of it had faded in months. Perfectly installed. Spotless. and in the eyes of the HOA, a glowing symbol of rebellion. So I leaned in. If they wanted seasonal realism, then I'd give them something they could really chew on. First, I bought a few gallons of biodegradable, non-permanent turf-safe paint in various shades of brown and yellow. It's the stuff sports teams use to mark temporary field lines. Then I mixed some of it into a spray bottle and carefully created artificial, dry patches across the lawn. Splotchy, uneven, just like real neglected grass. I even added a few bare spots. Not actual damage, of course, just clever use of shadowing and raking the blades to lie flat in different directions. Then came the piece de resistance, faux dandelions. Yes, I actually bought little plastic weeds online and strategically placed them where they'd accidentally sprouted through the turf. The final touch? A tasteful wooden sign staked into the grass near the curb. It read, "Now, 27% more natural. Approved by Mother Earth." By the time I stepped back to admire it, I had to admit it looked ridiculous. And that was exactly the point. If they were going to find me for not looking natural enough, I was going to beat them at their own game by going overboard. Too natural to be synthetic. Too fake to be real. The next day, I waited. And sure enough, Clipboard Carl, the unofficial compliance officer, came strolling down the sidewalk like a storm cloud in boat shoes. He stopped dead in front of my house and tilted his head. Then he scribbled furiously in his notebook. I stood on the porch sipping coffee and waved. "Morning." I called. He didn't reply. Just squinted at the new sign, pursed his lips, and took photos like I committed an act of terrorism with garden tools. I could already imagine the next HOA meeting, but I didn't have to wait long. The letter came 3 days later, this time asking me to remove all non-vegetative foreign objects from the lawn surface, including signage and non-sanctioned faux flora. No mention of my brown patches. That part, apparently, was acceptable. Still, I could feel something shifting. My satire had struck a nerve. The next HOA meeting was different. Normally, they were filled with bored retirees half listening to rule revisions and voting on shrub height limits. But this one? Packed. Standing room only. I wasn't even the only person wearing a t-shirt with "Too Green" the fail printed on it. A few other neighbors had started doing the same thing, adding natural touches to their own yards. One guy had spray-painted fake clumps of dog poop onto his lawn for realism. Another installed a little irrigation hose that misted once a day, even though the turf didn't need it, just to simulate dew. When the board chairwoman Cynthia tried to call the meeting to order, the room buzzed with energy. People weren't whispering anymore. They were chuckling, talking, sharing screenshots of the news segment. Then someone stood up and addressed the board directly. "I move to motion an amendment to Section 8.3b, he said, holding up a printed page. "Let's define acceptable turf standards with clear, measurable criteria, or just eliminate the vibrance clause altogether." Murmurs of agreement. Some people clapped. Cynthia frowned and banged the gavel. "We will not entertain mob tactics," she snapped. That's when I stood up. Calm but firm. This isn't a mob. It's the community. We're the ones who live here, who pay dues, who maintain our homes. We want rules that make sense, not ones that let a few people impose their personal taste on everyone else. Someone shouted, "Amen." I kept going. Artificial turf is drought-resistant, low-maintenance, and environmentally responsible. You should be encouraging it, not policing its color with binoculars and color wheels. We shouldn't be fined for being efficient. We shouldn't be punished for being practical. There was more clapping. The board looked uncomfortable, especially when a few newer residents stood up and shared their own horror stories. Christmas decorations taken down without notice, complaints about garage paint, someone who got cited because their potted plant obscured part of the front window. The tide was turning. The meeting ended with a promise to review current landscaping codes and consider member-submitted revisions. Translation: they were feeling the pressure. But that wasn't the end. The arbitration hearing, the legal one, was still scheduled for 2 weeks later, and I was ready for it. When the day came, I sat in a small county office room across from the HOA's lawyer, a sharp-suited man who looked like he specialized in billing by the minute. My attorney sat beside me with a folder an inch thick, filled with photos, email chains, videos, and excerpts from a handbook. The arbitrator, a retired judge, listened patiently as both sides presented their cases. The HOA's argument: my lawn's color was excessively synthetic and disrupted neighborhood cohesion. They cited Section 8.3b, the same vague paragraph I'd memorized by now. Then it was our turn. My attorney calmly laid out the case. The rule was ambiguous. There was no measurable standard, no color code, no enforcement consistency. We showed photos of multiple homes with lush green lawns, both real and artificial, none of which had received violation letters. We presented the public reaction, the community's own calls for policy reform, and the fact that no actual damages had occurred. The turf didn't devalue homes. It didn't offend anyone. It didn't cause harm. When we were done, the arbitrator leaned back, steepled his fingers, and said simply, "I agree with the plaintiff. The cited language is subjective and unenforceable as written. All fines issued under this violation will be dropped, and the HOA is instructed to revise or clarify this section before issuing similar violations in the future." Victory. It didn't come with confetti or fireworks, but it was enough. I walked out of that room feeling like I'd won something bigger than just a turf dispute. I'd won a little bit of freedom, the right to make logical choices for my property, the right to push back. Word spread fast. Within days, the HOA released a newsletter announcing a review and revision process for all landscaping regulations. Residents were invited to submit input. The board even scheduled a town hall forum, which, for the first time, wasn't held in a tiny meeting room, but in the large clubhouse auditorium. People showed up. They brought ideas. They brought examples. They asked questions. They laughed. The mood had shifted from fearful compliance to actual participation. My turf? Still green. Still perfect. But now, it stood without the weight of constant scrutiny. Months later, the revised HOA handbook was released. The vibrance clause had been rewritten entirely. Artificial turf was permitted, so long as it's professionally installed, free of physical damage, and kept clean, but color was no longer ground for citation unless it involved neon, glitter, or patterns. They even added a line encouraging eco-friendly landscaping practices, including synthetic options that reduce water usage. And just like that, a rule that had once been a weapon of control became a relic of the past. Looking back, it still blows my mind that something as simple as turf color could escalate into such a massive ordeal. But then again, maybe it was never just about the turf. Maybe it was about the principle behind it, the idea that small rules left unchecked become big restrictions, that silence becomes surrender, that compliance, when driven by fear instead of reason, turns neighbors into enforcers and homes into battlegrounds. I didn't set out to become the green grass guy. I didn't want to fight. I just want a yard I didn't have to mow. But in the end, I got something more important than a good lawn. I got my voice back. And along the way, I helped others find theirs too. If you're living in an HOA-run community, I'm not saying you have to become a rebel. I'm saying pay attention. Ask questions. Don't assume the rules are always right. And when you know something's wrong, even if it seems small, stand your ground. Because sometimes the fight for logic, fairness, and freedom starts with a little piece of green plastic and the courage to say, "No, I'm not browning my grass for you." So let me ask you something. How far should an HOA be allowed to go? Should they be able to dictate the shade of your lawn? The color of your curtains? The number of pumpkins on your porch? I get it. Rules matter. Order matters. But when they start to suffocate the very people they're meant to serve, maybe it's time to stop asking how green is too green and start asking who gets to decide in the first place. If you've ever had your own run-in with HOA madness, drop your story in the comments. Let's compare scars. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because I've got a lot more tales from the suburban frontline where this came from. Until next time, stay sharp, stay weird, and most of all, keep your grass as green as you want.